everybody. My name's Eric Gradman. I'm the co-founder and mad inventor here at 2-Bit Circus. You're in our house right now. Yesterday was Earth Day. And it's a very important day because saving this planet is probably the most important thing we can be spending our time on right now, which is why I'm so excited to be here with John Krajewski, who is the creator of Eco, an amazing game about saving the planet. Now, I understand you have a trailer for your game. Should we show that first?
Yeah, let's start off with that.
That looks amazing.
Eco, thank you.
So you've described this as Tragedy of the Commons, the game. What does that mean?
Yeah, so Tragedy of the Commons is this idea that given a common resource and unfettered access to it, it will become destroyed. Whereas with proper organization and regulation, you can use it in, everybody can benefit from it. So the game is really about kind of building those institutions among players. So you're creating a government, you're creating an economy, you're enacting laws. If everybody is given the free rein to do whatever they want, these shared resources can become destroyed and everybody suffers. But if you have this planning layer above it, then you're able to continue to use that sustainably.
That's great. Now, who is this game designed for?
So it's kind of a dual purpose. We have it both for the entertainment market and the education market. And we believe that there doesn't need to be a barrier between those two. That this idea that educational games can also be entertaining, or that hitherto they've kind of been very separate. And our working assumption is that that doesn't have to be the case, and that if you approach this with games that meet gamers where they are, like my background is I used to work at EA, I used to work at Midway, so my background is the commercial games industry, and now we're bringing this into the education space as well. And I think games have a lot to say there and have a lot of answers for the education system.
That's awesome. Talk to me about that transition, going from someone who thinks in terms of the commercial market and transitioning to an impact-based game.
Yeah, I think there's a natural kind of assumption that the two are opposed. Like if a game is educational, it's a trade-off between the entertainment and the education. But that doesn't have to be the case, and I think the way you approach that education is really important. Like if you're making a game where you are, you're having to like solve math problems to get to the next level, right? It's not really using that as a mechanic. Whereas a game like, in our game, you have to understand ecosystems, you have to understand statistics. The things you're learning are what you need to succeed in the game. They're not the end product of it. And I think positioning it like that, there doesn't have to be this separation. It can actually be a huge value add. So we've launched the game on Steam, where it's in early access right now, and it's been doing really well. And we're looking to start to move into the education world with that too.
That's awesome. So talk about the actual gameplay for a second, because I see that it's a collaborative game. So you're playing in a world with others, and at the same time, you seem to be able to affect an entire ecosystem. How do you balance those two factors?
A lot of it is the player organization themselves. So kind of through the arc of the game, you start off like in the early eras where individual humans don't have a lot of powers, but you're building up research and technology to the point where you can make huge impacts on the world. But during that time, you're also building up your regulation and your government and your laws and your taxes. So you're kind of like using government as a tool to like decide what the group should do. So balancing that is a big part of the gameplay.
And do leaders emerge in this collaborative world?
Oh yeah, we have, you can run elections in the game, so people get elected. And some of the funny things that happen, like we have European servers and we have American servers. And then when Europeans and Americans are playing together, we'll see a lot of times that there's big disputes on like tax policy. Like the Europeans want to tax everything, Americans don't want any taxes, and so there's these like battles going on within these worlds. It's really cool to see that play out.
It's also so interesting. I mean, you mentioned statistics. It seems like there must be some interesting learnings about how different regions of the world not just tax, but also think about their environment. What have you seen there?
We've seen that people will, by default, kind of not consider the group, and then once there's a problem, they like start to think about it. Like we were doing some tests in these classrooms, and first period came in, played the game, and first thing they do is they chop down like all the trees, build their houses up. And then the fourth period class is also playing. They come in, there's no more trees, so they chop down the houses of the first period class to build their houses. So you get this kind of like every man for themselves behavior by default, and that's where like giving them tools to like organize comes into play. And I think that letting people have that experience where like they face this problem, that then they have these solutions that they can encounter is great for education. It's great for, it's fun that way. So that's kind of the mindset that we take.
Have you seen any solutions to saving the planet that you didn't anticipate come out of this game?
There's a number of ones that kind of take advantage of like parts of the game, like banning certain elements or whatever, like preventing cars from existing at all, like banning that. So there's some extreme ones that will like kind of set back progress but protect the environment. So the most interesting ones are kind of these like adaptive, iterative governments that come out. And I think with climate change especially, that's one that requires a lot of like foresight, because if you don't start tackling the problem before it becomes a problem, you're going to be in a much worse situation, which is kind of like where the world is heading right now. So that's kind of reflected in the game world. And I think that as a game that wants to address that and kind of start to, do what it can and towards that social impact, having people start thinking in those terms, I think, especially young people, is really valuable.
That's great. Does the game end? Can you win this? Can you win this game?
Yeah, well, the setup for the game is you have 30 days to build a civilization capable of shooting a meteor down.
Oh, nothing. That's easy.
Yeah, but in that process, you're having to like create an industry, create a government, create an economy, and you can destroy all the like natural resources in the world if you're not careful. So you might actually like destroy it before it happens. So that 30-day point is kind of like when you win the game, and you win by the world is not destroyed and everything you built gets to like continue on. So we do want to have like further stuff, like maybe you go into space eventually and things like that. But yeah, so there is this like impetus to build. Like you have to build in the game. You know, it's all about like understanding that balance. It's not just, oh, you just need to be green, problem solved. Like there's a lot of challenges that need to be faced. And I think that the approach to solving climate change could be serviced a lot better by acknowledging that there's, you know, not being so like one-sided in these things, right? Like there's a lot of areas where there's complexities you got to figure out. You can't sacrifice all the way one way or the other.
Going back for a moment to the idea of commercial versus educational, it seems like the people who need this the most are the least likely to be able to pay for it in a sense. Or maybe I take that back. Maybe the people who need it most can afford it. How do you get this into the hands of the people who will be able to take its lessons to heart?
Yeah, we're actually building a program right now, the Eco-Citizen project, where we have like a shared world, so it's this online world that's just running continuously, and classrooms from different parts of the world will get into it. So like a classroom from Russia might jump in, and a classroom from, you know, Los Angeles, and a classroom from, you know, the Philippines or whatever. And they're all in this world sharing together where they have to like create a government, they have to like talk things out, run elections. It's this little microcosm that they're all taking part in. So having a program like that to get it into the teachers' hands worldwide and like connect people like that, I think that's a really powerful way to start this kind of global thinking mindset in the way that can like actually make differences to individuals.
That's so cool. I grew up playing Sim City and Sim Earth and all these sim games.
Love those.
What were your inspirations for this game?
Yeah, definitely those ones were huge. I really loved Ultima Online, which was like kind of one of the first online worlds where just it was really open and kind of anything goes, and you'd see these like communities forming and you know, people like forming like police systems in order to protect the server. So like these really interesting society dynamics. And that to me was so fascinating, to just have this like society simulator where the government is run by actual people, where the economy is just people buying and selling stuff. And that having that is something that like you can just learn a lot from just by playing with it. So a lot of games have like these kind of forced economies where, you know, like the shopkeeper sells this for X amount of gold, right? Whereas in our game, like you'll create currency, you'll share it with people. You have to have a much better understanding of like, what even is currency? Like what is, like how do we price this stuff? How do we exchange rates and stuff? So you kind of naturally figure this stuff out within the context of the game. And that's what I love about games as like a medium for education, is they're just these little motivation machines, right? Like kids will become obsessed with games and like, you know, get really deep into them and acquire whatever skills they need to succeed in them. And usually those skills are like being able to shoot really well or being able to like dodge or whatever, whereas games, it doesn't have to be that way. Like the skills you could need to succeed could be, you know, science or statistics or like collaboration or scientific organization. So that's what we want Eco to be. It's like those are the mechanics where your skills will advance you in the game.
It sounds like there are a number of different, think of them as almost paved roads that your players can embark on, like figuring out how to price things, figuring out how to use their resources properly. One thing I remember from SimCity and SimEarth and all those games is one day discovering in the back of the manual the diagram that showed how all of those things were connected, and realizing that there was a sort of weighted graph that drove the progression and the evolution of the worlds that I was building. It seems like you had to do a tremendous amount of research to come up with a realistic mechanisms in game. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So we have the ecosystem simulation, which is running like 24/7. So it just runs in the background of plants living their lives and like being affected by the various factors that are controlled by players as well. So if you pollute an area, you know, it might become damaged, but then like slowly recover. So building those simulations kind of from economic models was really fun and interesting and challenging. But also like making those visible and useful to the players. Because like if it's doing all this stuff that's just invisible to the player, it's not really that interesting. So we find ways to like, the player can dig in and see, like, you saw in the video, there's like heat maps of how things are being affected and like pollution rates and, you know, where player activity is. So understanding that simulation that we've built is key to kind of making decisions in the game.
I love those videos of the sort of peeking under the hood of the world and seeing those satellite views. I see how those can be incredibly helpful in a classroom setting. Do you find that outside a classroom setting, people are really digging into that data and trying to understand it and see their impact?
Yeah. People really get into the governmental side where they're analyzing that and saying, oh, look at this data, we need to do this. We're seeing them base their decisions on this data, which is really cool to see, because there's this kind of common set of facts that you can use for discussions, which a lot of times it feels like we don't have these days. Like everyone has their own kind of facts about the world. And that was something that I wanted people to be able to have. It's like, here's the simulation data. You can use this to make decisions about. So watching the way that they have disagreements and argue about it. We've seen people run political campaigns in the game and have attack ads for the other one.
Awesome.
Give speeches. One of the live streamers was streaming this debate, a town hall debate.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to open it up to the room for questions. But before we do that, is there anything that I've failed to mention here? I failed to ask you about?
I think that was a pretty good tour. So happy to answer questions.
Anybody in the room have questions? Yes, sir. Good to see you.
So are you working with any academics to study the outcomes of these things?
Yeah, so we actually had a grant from Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education, and we worked with a couple different firms, the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and University of Washington. We're doing research and testing on how students interact in these, how their opinions on climate change and environmentalism change through the course of the game, and it's shown really interesting results and how they're using data to convince their peers, and they're using statistics. So there are all these things that they're learning in school, they're applying. So yeah, that's a big part of it, especially with these grant programs that we're doing, that they have you do this research side, this academic background, and yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned there.
Any other questions from the audience?
What are some of the things that a player can do in game that will have the biggest effect on the kind of global warming scenario?
Right. So pumping CO2 into the atmosphere is a big one, which you kind of need to do early in the game in order to create iron. You're operating these furnaces, which are just blasting pollution, which has, the effect isn't that bad right away, and it's the kind of thing that happens much later. So figuring out having the foresight to be able to prevent that catastrophe from happening is a really big challenge in a lot of these worlds.
I'm really curious. I see that you got this game started through Kickstarter.
Yeah.
How was that experience for you, given the type of game you were building?
Kickstarter was great for us. I mean, Kickstarter, even more so than the money, the marketing value of it, of just getting this really motivated player base who's excited about the game and supporting it, was super powerful. They kind of became our advocates and helped us start to grow. So as a seed for our very first thing, building that campaign, getting people excited, it was really great. And through early access, we still haven't released it finally, but having that community every step of the way giving us feedback and playing the game and we're seeing what happens has been super valuable.
I feel like you've touched on this a little bit. We have time for just a little bit more, but what's next? I mean, you're going to release it to the world, you're going to go into space. What else?
So we're still building Eco, still under development. We're thinking about raising funding, getting some more simultaneous games in the same universe going, so that you have the space game or something, or the evolution game, and they're all connected. So what we want to do is build this suite of games that could cover a full curriculum at school. So as you're learning in school, you're in this game world applying what you're learning. You have an immediate application for everything you're learning. And I think that's one of the biggest things missing in education is first having it be self-driven and about inspiration, and second, having an answer to why do I need to learn this, right? There's so much you learn in school that just seems totally irrelevant to you. But games have the opposite problem. They're giving you infinite reasons to care that you're really into it, but it's not really that useful of skills that you're learning. So I think the combination of them is where we want to go.
That's great. Well, this sounds like the education I wish I had. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for what you're doing to save the planet, man. This is great.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.